Someone collapses on a crowded street, 20 people walk past. Nobody stops. You watch this happen in a video once, and you tell yourself you would be different. You would help. But the real answer is far stranger. The number of people around you doesn't make you safer. It makes you more likely to do nothing at all. This isn't a story about cruelty. It's not about cold hearts or broken cities. It's about a switch in your brain that flips the moment other people are watching the same emergency you are. And once you understand how that switch works, you'll never look at a crowd the same way again. Think about the last time you saw something slightly wrong in public. A dropped wallet nobody picked up. A car alarm nobody checked on. A child crying near an unfamiliar adult. And a dozen strangers glancing over, then glancing away. You felt the pull to act, and you felt the strange gravity that kept you rooted in place instead. That gravity has a name, a mechanism, and a very specific origin story, and it starts with a woman, a city, and a story that turned out to be more myth than fact, but uncovered something far more real underneath it. In March of 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. The story that spread afterward claimed dozens of neighbors heard her cries and did nothing. Windows lit up. Nobody called for help. A city condemned overnight as heartless. That specific account was later shown to be exaggerated by the press, and the true details of that night were more complicated than the headlines allowed. But the case caught the attention of two psychologists, John Darley and Bib Latane, and instead of accepting the easy explanation that people had simply become cruel, they asked a sharper question. What if the crowd itself was the cause? They ran an experiment to test it directly. A participant sat alone in a room, speaking to other people through an intercom, believing the entire conversation was private and unmonitored. Suddenly, one voice began to choke, stammer, and call for help, sounding exactly like a seizure was happening in real time, right there through the speaker. When the participant believed they were the only one who could hear it, 85% of them rushed out to get help within a minute. Fast. Almost automatic. But when the same participants believed 4 other people could also hear the exact same emergency, that number dropped to 31%. Some didn't move at all until the experiment ended. Same emergency, same choking voice, same fear in their own chest. The only variable that changed was how many other people they believed were listening. Why would knowing others are present make you less likely to act? Darley and Latane called it diffusion of responsibility. When you're the only witness, the weight of the emergency lands entirely on you. There's no one to share it with, no one to defer to, no one to hide behind. But the moment you believe others are watching too, your brain quietly does the math without asking your permission. Surely someone else is better positioned to help. Surely someone else already called for help. Surely someone else will step in first because they're closer or calmer or more qualified. The responsibility doesn't disappear when it's shared. It just gets divided into smaller and smaller pieces, distributed across every person present until the piece left sitting in your hands feels light enough to set down and walk away from. There's a second force working alongside it, and it's even sneakier because it hides inside the very act of looking for reassurance. It's called pluralistic ignorance. Picture this. A man collapses on a train platform. Your first instinct is to check the emergency against everyone else's reaction, the way you'd check a fact against a second source. You glance around. Everyone else is standing still, faces calm, not reacting. So you quietly downgrade your own alarm and assume it must not be that serious. Meanwhile, every other person on that platform is doing the exact same private calculation, looking around, reading everyone else's calm expression, concluding it must be fine because nobody else looks worried. A crowd of people, each one privately unsure, each one publicly performing certainty they don't actually feel, because nobody wants to be the one who overreacts to what might turn out to be a false alarm. The tragedy is that the crowd isn't actually calm at all. It's just silently terrified of being wrong, together, in perfect synchronized stillness. Put those two forces side by side, and you get something almost paradoxical. The more witnesses there are to a crisis, the more evidence each individual person collects that it must not be a crisis, and the more responsibility each individual person feels they've been let off the hook from carrying. 100 people can stand around someone in danger, each one absorbing calm from the person next to them, each one assuming the group as a whole has it handled, when in truth, the group has nothing handled at all. Nobody is holding the responsibility. It has evaporated into the space between all of them. To understand why your brain does this so effortlessly, you have to go back much further than 1964. Your ancestors didn't evolve in cities of 8 million strangers, surrounded by faces they would never see again. For most of human history, you lived in small bands, maybe 50 to 150 people, a figure the anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent decades researching, and which later became known as Dunbar's number, roughly the upper limit of stable relationships a human brain can meaningfully track. In a group that size, everyone knew everyone. There were no anonymous strangers in the crowd, because there was no crowd, only your people. If someone collapsed in a group that small, there was no ambiguity about who was responsible for helping. It was the whole tribe, and specifically, it was you, because your survival was woven into theirs in a way that couldn't be quietly outsourced to a stranger 3 feet away. There were no strangers 3 feet away. Helping wasn't a moral choice you sat down and weighed. It was instinct, immediate and automatic, because the group was your entire world, your food supply, your protection, your children's future. Letting someone in your band die was, in a very real sense, letting a piece of your own survival die with them. Now stretch that same nervous system, unchanged in its wiring for tens of thousands of years, across a city street, a train platform, a comment section filled with thousands of strangers scrolling past someone in visible distress. Your brain still runs the old tribal math because it has never been updated. It sees a crowd and reads it as safety in numbers, the same signal that once meant more hunters, more protection, more hands to share the load. It has no framework for a crowd of total strangers who owe each other nothing and will likely never see one another again. What should register as responsibility divided into nothing, instead, gets misread as responsibility comfortably shared. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This isn't limited to emergencies on the street. Psychologist Bib Latane spent years afterward studying how this same freezing pattern shows up anywhere a group is present, not just in life or death moments, but in every ordinary corner of daily life where a decision needs to be made and more than one person is watching. Think about the meeting where everyone senses a mistake in the numbers on the slide and nobody says anything, because everyone privately assumes someone with more seniority will surely mention it first. Think about the group chat where a friend sends a message that sounds a little too heavy, a little too dark, and it gets read by a dozen people, and nobody replies, because everyone assumes someone closer to that friend will reach out. Think about the neighborhood where a strange car has been parked too long, or a child is walking home unusually late, and everyone notices, and everyone assumes someone else has already called it in. Now take it online, where a pile-on happens in plain view of thousands of people at once, and every single one of them assumes their one voice in a crowd that size won't matter enough to be worth using. The freeze isn't a character flaw unique to certain people. It's a bug in how your ancient brain calculates group size, running the same outdated formula whether you're standing on a sidewalk or scrolling through a feed at midnight. So does this mean you're doomed to freeze? Not entirely. And this is where the research gets genuinely hopeful. Darley and Latané found that the bystander effect isn't really about crowd size, it's about ambiguity. It thrives in moments where nobody is sure what's actually happening or who is supposed to act, which means the fix isn't asking people to somehow care more. It's removing the ambiguity that lets responsibility dissolve in the first place. If you've ever taken a CPR class, you've probably heard the instruction to point directly at one specific person and say, "You, in the red jacket, call 911, instead of shouting a general plea to the crowd. That single sentence collapses the diffusion instantly because it removes every ounce of ambiguity in one move. There's no more silent math to run. No more quiet negotiation about who's better positioned or more qualified. No more waiting to see what everyone else decides to do first. One person has been handed the responsibility, out loud, by name, in front of everyone, and the freeze breaks almost immediately because the psychological loophole that let it dissolve has been closed. Researchers have confirmed this pattern across dozens of real emergency scenarios since Darley and Latané's original work. Naming someone, specifically and directly, erases the exact ambiguity that lets an entire crowd stay frozen in place, each person waiting on everyone else. Which means the next time you're the one who needs help, the smartest thing you can do isn't shout for anyone. It's pick one face in the crowd, look directly at them, and make it impossible for the responsibility to diffuse. And the next time you're the one standing in the crowd, feeling that strange hesitation, that quiet urge to check what everyone else is doing first, you'll recognize it for what it actually is. Not indifference, not cruelty. Just an ancient tribal calculator built for bands of 150 people, trying and failing to make sense of a crowd of thousands. Someone collapses on a crowded street. 20 people walk past. But this time, you know exactly why. And knowing why might be the one thing that makes you the 21st.